Hello and welcome to Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I interview entrepreneurs doing startups across borders and the investors who support them, with a focus on companies that have some relationship to Latin America. Today's guest is Nicolas Shea, a Chilean entrepreneur, philanthropist, and now a presidential candidate running for Chile's presidency. Nicolas has been a teacher, started nonprofits, worked in government, and built businesses that have expanded across Latin America. He co-founded Eclass, one of Latin America's largest education companies, and was the co-founder of Start-Up Chile, an innovative program that gave entrepreneurs visas and equity-free grants to move to Chile, kickstarting the entrepreneurial ecosystem. It's also where I met Nicolas almost 7 years ago. After Startup Chile, he co-founded Cumplo, a peer-to-peer lending platform that helps businesses access credit more quickly and at better rates than the traditional banking system does. Cumplo has helped over 800 businesses with more than $200 million in loans. Subsequently, Nicolas took a step back from Cumplo to co-found Todos, a Chilean citizen-powered political party, and is now currently running for Chile's presidency. So let's get started and jump right in. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So where are we today?
Today we are in Cumplo.
In Santiago, Chile.
In Santiago, Chile, exactly.
And so you're from Chile originally, right?
Well, I was born in New York City.
Uh-huh.
My mother's Chilean. My dad's New Yorker. Didn't work out. We moved back when I was 3 or 4, I think.
Uh-huh.
And I've been here ever since.
And so you've been doing lots and lots of businesses and different movements and foundations, charities, things for the last, what is it about now, 15, 20 years?
Long time.
And so
18 actually, but
18. So
yeah,
how did you?
It'll be 20 like next week, like in 5 minutes.
It's coming right up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way about being in Chile. It's going to be like 7 years this year. That's kind of crazy. But so you've taken a path that probably a lot of Chileans didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
What made you get into starting businesses and deciding to work in a big company?
So 2 things. The first one, or 3 actually. I think the first one has to do with my stepfather encouraged me a lot. We talked about doing businesses. We have a small farm outside of Santiago, and I had hens and horse and dogs, and I grew asparagus, and I sold them when I was 12 years old and 14. I had some stocks, remember, when I was 15. So I kind of got that feeling of the business. Second thing, my first year was in engineering school, although I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I did quite well in my SATs, and I decided, everyone said I had to be an engineer. And my first year in engineering school was a total disaster. Because if you really want to, it's really tough, and either you're a mathematical genius, which I wasn't. I was good at math, but not a genius, or you really want to be an engineer. I haven't, and for those that had none of those, it's a nightmare. So for a year, I hanged out with one of the smartest individuals I've been around, and looking backwards, I realized very early, that there were so many smarter people than myself in that room, so in the world. And the third point is that my first year was in the financial sector. Worked in investment bank as an analyst, so I got in touch with financial modeling, and second with large corporations, and it became very clear to me very early that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I did, after 1 year in the corporate world, financial world, which I don't regret at all. I learned a lot. I just moved out of the box, and there I went.
And what was the first business that you did?
So the first one, well, it wasn't a business. I started a project called Jóvenes al Servicio de Chile when I was 26, and that was sort of a Teach for America, but to work in municipalities. I was 27 maybe. After that, I decided I wanted to go into education. So having a business and economics background, all of my friends would do, the normal path was to go and get your MBA somewhere. I decided to go to a school of education. I did a master's in education.
Interesting.
And after that, I said, okay, if I really want to go into education, as an entrepreneur, I want to understand, the educational world. So I did that. Afterwards, I worked for a year and a half in the Santiago school district, and long story short, I quit that and I started my first company, which is called Eclass. It's an e-learning company, and we've been around for the last 12 years, and it's been a phenomenal experience. It employs like 300 people now, and it's present in Chile, Peru, Colombia, and it's a main player in the blended learning market in Latin America. I went to the U.S. 5 years after founding and leading Eclass. I went to Stanford. I took a year off.
I'm going to jump back into Eclass there for a second, because what made you think to get the education degree and then work in education before starting the company? I mean, that's something that I think some entrepreneurs would do, but the vast majority, and then people who aren't entrepreneurs would never even think of doing.
So I guess I was teaching at university. I got, I taught, but education has always meant a lot to me. My great grandfather was an educator, and so I think very early on I committed to an industry, to a sector, and I said I want to, allocate. I want to spend the rest of my professional life in the educational sector. Why? Because that's where there's the greatest need and social impact, and second, it could be profitable at the same time. There were a bunch of business models around. There was a voucher charter movement, privatization of education, of school districts in the U.S. in those days. So I said, this is fascinating. I could go into education as an entrepreneur. And so that was it. So now I know what an entrepreneur what it means, and I know how to do a spreadsheet and calculate net present values. What I'm missing out is the education side. So it was very obvious for me. And I think I highly recommend to if you find an industry or a sector in which you really want to spend a lot of time and drill deep. That's a huge competitive advantage. Usually at the age when you're around 27 or 8, you're all over the place. You go out, you go and get your MBA. You get even more lost because the alternatives are just infinite. Yeah. So coming into a graduate program with sort of an idea in mind, that I think is very, very helpful. So then I started Eclass when I was 30, actually for my birthday.
Nice gift to yourself.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great gift for myself. And the other thing, I was married with 2 young daughters at the time. I think it's a huge advantage also to start early. I see my friends now that are at top positions in the corporate world. It's really hard to go from a lot to zero very quickly. And so another important advice. I mean, the main one is if you find the right companion. Marry the right person. If you marry the wrong person or stick around the wrong person, it's just so hard, because this is a 24/7, 365 and 6-hour job. So having the right person is extremely helpful. Not only smart and committed, but also that can deal with the fact that you'll have less resources and you'll be driving an older car and not having a second house, not even a first house, all that stuff.
And did your wife know you before you were an entrepreneur, when you were in school, or after you had already started your first business or your first foundation?
So we were dating when I quit my job in the investment banking and joined the charity. So I went from investment banking and having like the hottest, job in my cohort to, working, part-time for a third the salary in a beautiful organization that provides shelter for elderly homeless people. So I did that for a year, and then after that I went to start another not-for-profit project, which is Coordinación Servicio de Chile. So all of that happened before we got married. So she realized what she was getting into, and actually we did that. We did a marital promise. Actually, it was a unilateral promise, and she said, "Nico, I know who I'm getting married to. I'm gonna support you and help you, but I will never work with you." So 5 years after starting Eclass, I said, okay, now we've built a very solid base, and we're gonna scale it up.
Mm-hmm.
I love Archimedes' principle. You can just give me one true point, and I can build a universe around it. So that standing point was Eclass in Chile. So then I took a year off. I went to Stanford. I spent a year there. And the idea was, and after graduating, I decided to stay in Stanford and sort of, build this multinational company and grow it from there,
Mm-hmm.
which made a lot of sense, actually. And I was doing that. So I graduated, June. And so I was working, I stayed working in Palo Alto. And then 5 months later, there was a change in government, and there was a 9.2 earthquake in Chile.
Mm-hmm.
And completely unexpected, I was invited to join the government as the innovation and entrepreneurship advisor to the
Mm-hmm.
Minister of Economy. That wasn't my plans, but after I was invited 2 days before the earthquake,
Uh-huh.
and I was flattered.
Yeah.
They don't call you up every day,
Yeah.
to invite you to government in a senior position. But then when the earthquake happened, we had some family losses that were very, it was very, very personal cost, and the national cost was just huge. So we said, we after getting the notice of the earthquake, we decided to go back instantly. And so that interrupted my path to Eclass. But it opened just amazing doors.
And do you know if there was a large group or more Chileans like you who are living abroad that came back to help after the earthquake and started to do, or is that more
well,
of a
I know
small...
some that came back because of me,
Uh-huh.
because I went hiring very aggressively.
Uh-huh.
My best friend was one of those individuals. His wife still doesn't forgive me.
Don't
But
get
anyway,
that Sunday dinner invitation every time.
yeah, exactly. No, but I'm his third son's godfather, so I think they got around.
Yeah, you got it there.
Yeah. So so we came back, and I had 2 weeks to develop a plan for helping Chile to get back on its feet, and basically how could we where were the shortcuts,
Mm-hmm.
and talking to people in the valley and to former professors and investors. I had basically, actually, as a student at Stanford, I had been thinking around this idea that everyone is just thinking, because it's so obvious that the whole immigration system is so screwed up in
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. Now they have a big issue with legal immigration, but mainly what's happening, the high skilled immigrants, it's suicidal. So basically, the U.S. But basically the U.S. is attracting funding, training, and then expelling these talented immigrants. Many of those were in my class at Stanford. So I said, this is so stupid. These guys would love to stay in the U.S., but they won't because they can't, and it's impossible. To get a job as a foreigner, it's easy because your company will sponsor the visa. But to start a company, to be an entrepreneur, foreign entrepreneur in the U.S., it's really hard. I didn't have that problem because I was born in New York City, so I had the passport. But I saw how my good friends struggled with trying to stay, and they couldn't. So I remember telling myself, if I had power and I were in office, I would pay these guys, I don't know, $500,000, $1 million. The present value of having, Rob Lawson from the UK, or Michael Stuckey from Switzerland, or whatever, Sanjay from India. It was huge. So, and ironically, 6 months later, I found myself in the position of power and pitching the minister, and I presented a plan, and the last point of that plan was, let's invite the best entrepreneurs, or good enough entrepreneurs from all around the world to come to Chile. His first reaction was, why the hell would a good entrepreneur that is already in Silicon Valley and all these, spots want to come to Chile? And I said, I don't know, let's go and find out, and let's see how can we make them come to Chile. So, and they said, let's set high standards, and if there are any entrepreneurs that meet those standards, let's bring them in. And if not, fine, it's a bad idea, let's find something else. And he agreed to that.
And how was that process with, you're giving money to, at the beginning, non-Chileans? How did the government react to that?
Yeah, after that conversation for the next month, I was still commuting between Santiago and Palo Alto. And for the next months, basically, I was interviewing entrepreneurs in the Valley at Stanford campus. And I would ask them, would you do you know Chile? Most of them said yes. Would you come to Chile? Most of them said no. I'm already here. Why would I go to Chile? And then there was sort of a bargaining process. And it came down to, that they would be willing to come for, if we covered their personal expenses and some working capital for, 3 months was too short, a year was too long, so it was 6 months. So we came with this package for foreign entrepreneurs that was a bait for them to come to Chile. So actually, Nate, you were one of them.
We took the bait.
Yeah, you took the bait, and it worked.
Yeah, we saw an article in Forbes that said that Chile was giving entrepreneurs $40,000 of equity-free money to come down to Chile for 6 months.
Yeah.
And we were already looking to get out of Wisconsin because there's going to be Wisconsin winter.
Yeah, there you go.
So we were looking at Austin, Texas, and San Francisco, and it was going to be expensive.
So going back to your question, we decided to, offer this subsidy to entrepreneurs living outside of Chile. Could be Chileans, but they had to be, because this was it was a public, but it's very important what I learned, and what I've learned in entrepreneurship. You need to be very focused. What's the one thing you're going to solve? Because if it's more than one thing, that usually, makes the probability of success even lower. And so the one thing we knew that correlated really highly with development, economic and social development, and entrepreneurship was immigration. Why? Because immigrants, when they show up, they don't know anyone, and they need to eat and provide their kids, so they need to do something, and usually it's much harder for them. They don't know the language, so they have to create something because it's harder for them to get a job. And that's not very glamorous, but that's really what's behind 90% of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship comes out of need.
Yep.
Maybe more than 90%. So actually, I before coming, a friend of mine had recommended that I read this Start-Up Nation book, which basically tells a story of the Israeli miracle, and the main ingredient of the miracle is that after, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and when the Soviet experiment collapsed, I don't know, something like 700,000 highly trained Jews went back to Israel. And, a quarter of the population. So guess what happened? In 30 years, Israel becomes, the leading, guy in the innovation around the world. So we said, unfortunately, we don't have that, the Israeli Jewish, it's Chile, no. So we had to pay people to come to Chile, basically. And so, but the whole point, it was entrepreneurs. The what was entrepreneurs, but the why was, connecting Chile to the world. So basically that answers the question. If the policy is around bringing people from abroad, it makes no sense at all. To open the process to locals, right? So we held that for 2 rounds, but then it became a political suicide. I mean, people in Chile wanted to kill us, and me personally, because we were discriminating against Chileans. So then we said, okay, let's open it up for Chilean applicants. And then I think, in retrospective, it wasn't planned, but we were very lucky. It was very important, because if we had opened it from day one to Chileans, we would have had an overrepresentation of Chileans in the group, which would have hurt the whole purpose of the experiment. And one of the most valuable aspects of Startup Chile is the diversity of the community. And actually, I must say that Chilean entrepreneurs Chilean Startup Chile entrepreneurs, they're not really good for the program. And in general, they don't participate as much. They don't interact. Why? Because they're living with their parents and they've got their whole local network, and they pretty much. So, anyway, but today, today there's like a 25% or 30% of Chileans, which I guess it's for political purpose, it's okay.
I think it's actually gotten better in the last few rounds. From our perspective, we've invested, I think, in 4 companies from Chilean founders that went through Startup Chile and fully bought in, fully participated, and are doing well. So I think, as the ecosystem's gotten better, there's more room now for good local people.
Oh yeah, no, I absolutely, on economic terms. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It just works.
Yeah.
I don't want to be just too fanatic about it, but it's 25. Those entrepreneurs, we could have, connected them to the program anyway.
Yeah.
We're still, not bringing in 25% of foreign entrepreneurs, but it's fine. It's in the margin. So it worked, and we brought in, and there was an unbelievable interest for the program. At one point, there were 3,000 applicants for 100 slots.
Yep.
And this number, which we said, okay, for this government, so it was fascinating. In April of 2010, actually the first time I presented Startup Chile to this committee of ministers, most of them laughed. And they thought this was ridiculous. And after that meeting, my boss, who was the Minister of Economy, said, "Nicolas, are you sure this is going to work?" And he said, "Minister Fontaine, this is not only going to work, this government will be remembered because of Startup Chile." And I really meant it. So that was my level of obsession and connection with the program, because I it was obvious. The communicating classes, I don't know how you say it in English, there was such a huge pressure there were hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs, with immigration issues.
Yep.
That this country that not only solved that, but on top of it provided money. And not only that, but connection to the networks. And, Chile is a very nice place. We have a Mediterranean weather. You know it better than me by now.
And now about 1,700 companies, 1,800 companies have gone through it?
Yeah,
something like
so
that?
1,700 countries and 3,000 entrepreneurs, because there are usually a couple behind every startup, plus their families, and we've pretty much created our own, Silicon Valley, as the Economist named it, in October of 2013. And we served the purpose, which was to position Chile as the hub, innovation entrepreneurship hub in Latin America. That pisses off Argentinians, Mexicans, and Brazilians. But, if you ask anyone around the world what's the place to go, I would guess that half of them would rank Chile first.
Well, and I remember when I went to South by Southwest in 2010, before Startup Chile, to launch our business, and everyone wanted to talk about our business. We went back the next year with our business doing much better, but having been in Startup Chile for, I think, 4 months, nobody cared about our business. All they wanted to hear about was Chile. And so, it's definitely done that job in the startup community.
Yeah. And it's been an amazing branding for our country. So I was on that. I was leading Startup Chile for a year, and afterwards. But how the government works, there's usually a ministry, and then there's an agency attached to it. So the ministry where I was part of, we designed the policy, and then the agency, which was Corfo, executed it. Actually, the one who executed it in Corfo was my best friend, actually, Cristobal Undurraga, who's the guy I dragged from the U.S. from Palo Alto to Santiago, and he didn't. So the execution team was phenomenal. So after a year and a half, my sort of involvement in starting it up sort of was less required than RG. And then I came across another huge problem, which was over-indebtedness and usury in Chile. And that's when, I started my second company. So I thought after Startup Chile, I would go back to Eclass, but then Eclass had grew over that year and a half. And I sort of, I don't know if I always had it, but I sort of developed and liked this first stage in starting companies and projects and, movements. And so I said, okay, I'm going to, stick around Eclass. They don't need me as the CEO, because there was a phenomenal team. So I'm going to start this other company, where we're here today, 6 years later. And so basically a person that worked with me came one day in February of 2011 asking for money because she needed to pay her retail store loans. And this woman in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, she owed 17 times her salary.
Wow.
At a 73% interest rate.
Wow.
So I just, couldn't believe it. And I went to the store to negotiate on her behalf. And I realized it wasn't just her. There were hundreds of people in the same situation.
Yep.
And then I went to check, the internet, and there were millions in the same situation. So out of a population of working force of 10 million people, half of that today in Chile are defaulted in their loans.
Wow.
5 million people are in DICOM, which is the local version of FICO.
Half of the workforce. That's a huge number.
It's a huge number.
And what's the average amount of money that they owe, or any sort of stats around total amount of debt or anything?
So that's a problem. I don't know. No one knows. No one knows why, because there's no information. There's no consolidated information. So in the developed world, like the US, the UK, Germany, everyone knows everyone who gives a loan must inform that loan to a general source, right? Because that's public information. That's very important, because if you want to price a loan, you need to know how much a person makes, how much she owes, and what's her willingness to pay.
Yeah.
So in Chile, we don't have a system that there's no aggregate information. So every retail store and every individual is lending money, just on the side. And second, there's no, positive credit scoring. So in the US, when you turn 18, maybe the first thing your folks told you after happy birthday was go and get a loan. Because you need to start building your credit history now, right? In Chile, that just doesn't happen, because since all that, you're not required to inform all the information. Companies here only inform when Nate, didn't fulfill his loan.
Yeah.
And so only the negative. So in Chile, think about it. If I wanted to give you, Nate, a loan, or you wanted to give me a loan, the only information you would know is basically when I have only the negative information around me. That's and that becomes a huge competitive advantage and barrier to entry for the banking and financial system.
Yeah.
Because there are very few people that have access to that information. Who are those guys? The big guys.
Yeah.
That have large databases on their own, so they really don't need to collaborate with the rest. And actually having that proprietary information, they say it's theirs and they shouldn't share it, because they pretty much built it over the years. But that's public. That's a public asset. So we're still discussing that, which has been which was discussed in the US maybe 100 years ago.
Yep.
So we decided to start Cumplo, and basically Cumplo is a peer-to-peer lending platform that connects people directly, borrowers and lenders, and basically replaces the role of the intermediary. That was in late 2011.
And so what do interest rates and default rates and things like that look like compared to if we've got half of the country defaulting on non-Cumplo stuff and paying, I've seen even some of our entrepreneurs with their line of credit for the company, they're paying 60, 70, 80%. What's it look like for either a company or a person at Cumplo?
So we started with the business model. Basically, we copied Prosper. We translated Prosper, and which was highly irresponsible, because we weren't aware of all this information issue. You could call that stupid or ingenuity, whatever, but we just did it. And
gotta start somewhere.
Yeah, you gotta start somewhere, and we pretty much early on. We overestimated the power of the network, the social networking pressure. So we said, fine, although we don't know that information, if borrowers, give us their LinkedIn and Facebook accounts, and all their friends but that didn't really help a lot. So after a year and a half trying to door business model, it was flawed because it was impossible to assess a loan, the rate of a loan. And our non-payables started going up, and then so as they went up, the filters became more strict. So by the end of the day, we were rejecting 98 out of 100 loans. So pretty much our since we don't have the information that banks and retail stores had, it was much harder to get a loan in Cumplo than
Sure.
in the same banks.
Sure.
So and then we pivoted to SMEs, and now Cumplo, for the past 3 years, we've been only exclusively focused on SMEs. Then we found another huge problem. In Chile, there's the average rate for SMEs is around 3% per month.
For factoring.
For factoring, yeah. So in a country that has a 3% inflation and whatever normal macroeconomic numbers, 3% a month, it's even worse.
It's crazy.
That's 6% a month to an individual.
Yeah.
Because for a company, you have collaterals, you have information, and if you denounce a person to DICOM that she or he has defaulted in that, they really don't care. There are no real consequences because there are no collaterals around it.
Yeah.
But when you accuse an SME, or you denounce an SME that has defaulted in the rate, that has immediate consequences. But because you block all the access to credit, etc.
Yeah.
So the risk around SMEs was much lower. So long story short, this month we're gonna do like $10 million in transactions. So we're by far the largest platform in Latin America. Like 50% of Latin America, 90% of Chile. And so an average loan here is around $35,000. It's financed on average by 12 investors. The interest rate, the average APR is around 21%, which I still consider to be high, but it's much lower than the 30% that is the average APR that our customers had before outside of Cumplo. So bringing down the financial cost to a SME 21 by a third is huge. We hope to bring it down from 21 to 15 within the next 12 to 24 months, but that will require more traction, more investors, and on the side of the investors, an average investor that saves in a savings account in the bank or a mutual fund will get an average, on real terms, maybe 1 or 2% per year. In Cumplo, they're getting on average around 7% per year. So we're not only decreasing the financial cost to borrowers in a third, but we're multiplying by 2 or 3 times the return on savings to our investors. So the social impact of Cumplo is just, I think this is going to be a phenomenal business, profitable business. But at the same time, the social impact is just huge. And the big picture is that one of the big problems of developing economies is there's a very low. The SMEs represent a very small fraction of GDP. In Germany, I think it's around 45%. The US, I think, is around 40%. In Chile, it's around 17%. And they employ like 80% of the population. So when 80% of the working force in a country represents only 17% of the GDP, you have a big sustainability problem. Because that creates, that just increases the gap of income. And by the way, I really don't have a problem with differences on outputs, but I do have a huge problem with differences in inputs. I don't know, if Steve Jobs had $5 billion when he died, or 10, I don't care. The iPhone, Pixar, whatever, the iPad, amazing products. But when people become super rich because they have some unfair advantages that have to do with local regulations or powerful positions or where you were born and what's your last name, I really have a problem with that. Having been, by the way, one of the privileged in this country.
So you've seen it sort of from the inside, but also operating businesses that weren't necessarily the traditional businesses that someone from the inside would operate.
Yeah.
Was that a conscious decision from the beginning, or did you just sort of find your way into those roles?
What happens is that I think we the underlying, what's really happening here with the internet, it's that we're all becoming interconnected, and with people, when people become interconnected, that just changes the game of every single industry, sector, organization, ecosystem existing. So the role of the intermediary just becomes not irrelevant, but much less relevant than it used to. So, before the internet, you had no time to be looking for people to give you the money. You had to do the risk assessment. So the role of the bank was key. And when you needed a car, you had to call a taxi company. And when you needed a property, you needed to call the realtor. And when you needed whatever, you wanted to hear music, you had to go to the record store. But you don't need to do that anymore. So when you apply the current social networking logic, and when you really understand that the crowd above some critical mass becomes smarter than the smartest individual, that's super powerful. You apply that to cars, you get Uber. You apply it to properties, you get Airbnb. You apply it to music, you get Spotify. You apply it to loans, you get Cumplo. And maybe you want to talk, and you apply it to politics, and you get Todos.
Yeah, so that's a segue into your next step after you've gone and done Cumplo. So what are you doing now?
So very early on, when we in Cumplo, one of the, I think, biggest mistakes, but maybe luckiest mistakes, was that very early on we gave an interview, Jan Boyer and I, my co-founder, in a newspaper, and basically it was a whole page, us in jeans and sneakers, saying that pretty much financial intermediaries were not as relevant anymore.
Yep.
And the next day we got a call from the superintendent of banks, and a month later we had 7 police officers in our office. So
they really needed 7. I mean, you guys are pretty dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. armed police officers. And actually, a week after that, one of the police came back to Cumplo because he needed money. Think about it.
He wanted to get a loan.
Yeah, wanted to get a loan. Exactly. So when that happened, it was like, there was a much greater problem than education, than banking or factoring or financial industry. It's politics. It's government. The biggest enemy or resistance to, to freedom is concentration of power. And in Chile, I guess in the world, just the government is too big, and the incumbents are too concentrated. So when you have a concentrated economic system and you have a concentrated political system, and very limited free press. That just doesn't, it goes only one way. It's a matter of time. So in Cumplo, we were threatened with jail by a regulator that couldn't explain what was our wrongdoing. The only thing he knew was that it was wrong, and if we kept on doing it, we would go to jail. And his only argument at the end of the discussion, when he couldn't explain what we were doing, he clearly had no idea. He said his only argument was that he had received a call from one of the incumbent banks. So the guy who was supposed to be defending the citizens was defending the incumbents. And that was a huge reality check. And after that, for the next 3 years, for the next year, we had to prove our innocence. And for the next 3 years, we had to prove our business model. And we reached break even a couple of months ago, and I think we're in a really, really good, very powerful, strong trajectory in Cumplo. But 2 years ago, things in Chilean politics began to get really messed up, and it became evident, again, thanks to the internet, where the money was coming from, and why certain laws were being passed. And so in that moment, I got together with a group of entrepreneurs, 30 entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, and we said, we were all concerned of what was going on, And I think so we said, what are we going to do about it? And if you are really, understand, believe in democracy, and you really, face that question, it's really hard. That the answer is something different than getting involved. And that was our answer. And he basically declared in front of a lot of people that I was going to get involved. I didn't know how. We would figure that out. And for the next couple of months, we pretty much went out, we talked with citizens, asking them what they thought about democracy, about Chile, about Chilean politics. And it became very clear that actually 2/3 in the last election, 2/3 of Chileans didn't show up to vote. And when you asked them why, it was because they didn't want to be a part of the system, because the system was not transparent, was not competitive, and there was no ideological consistency. Basically, politicians said whatever they wanted. There was zero accountability. So we said, okay, let's build a party, which is pretty much a Cumplo for politics. It's the same logic. Let's build an open platform. Let's have what's our purpose? Our purpose was democracy, which is our common ideology, and let's allow any citizen to participate, and just let's make a fair play to every citizen. So then you have to win the election, but at least you can run for candidate for any, and you only the only thing you need to agree, we all need to agree, is to democracy. And that it's going to be transparent. If you want to run, you need to be transparent. You need to declare your ideology. You need to participate. If you lose, you lose. You need to accept it. And if you win, you need to do, or at least try to do, what you said you were going to do. So basically, you need to align yourself. You need to align yourself with yourself. Unless you have a really big problem, that should be sort of quite easy, right? And if we have differences, fine, we'll vote. And we'll vote on those things that we disagree, and we'll work together on those things that we agree. Now that we have all the cards on the table, we know, where we agree, where we disagree, so that should make it easier to participate. And those that represent the most amount of citizens, will win the election, and those that don't will not. And if they do what they said they would do, they will be reelected, and if they don't, they won't. So we're pretty, it's like LinkedIn plus TripAdvisor and plus, Cumplo registered as a political party.
So the idea basically is to get full transparency where people can rate the politicians that are running, that are thinking about running, see if they actually did what they said they were going to do, see who's backing them, all that sort of stuff.
So you can't rate those that haven't run yet. The rating only starts once you're in. But you need to say, there's an ideological questionnaire. You can crowdfund your campaign from the site. You will actually. I'm just talking about the things that will happen eventually. We're getting there. But the greatest innovation of this project, it's that it's registered as a party. So you're not going to end up fooling around Twitter or Facebook. This has, real life implications. And if you win the online primary, your name will be printed in the ballot. And people will be able to, write a line, draw a line next to your name, and you get enough lines in the real world, you will be sitting in Congress or in the presidential palace or in the municipality. And so we're gonna take, so basically we're updating the political version. So our political version in Chile, it's on version 0.0001, and we're taking it to a 100.1. And I think if this succeeds, how I think it will, Chile will become the most democratic country in the world.
So you see parallels to the Start-Up Chile experience where, you sort of fixed or changed the immigration policy from sort of the inside with a small change by letting more foreigners in. Do you see, and built a platform to make Chile kind of the number one for innovation in Latin America and probably even the world in terms of government programs? Do you see the same for the political party?
Oh, absolutely. Because being a small country has big disadvantages, but has huge advantages. I've been running for a month. I've invested like $2,000 in Facebook, and I'm already in the polls. Of course, I'm last. But I'm there. I'm a relevant presidential candidate. I'm one of 15 candidates. I was surprised though. I got a 37% of rejection. People that know me don't like me, which is sort of flattering. Because if you have 100%, that means you're a populist, or you're just saying you're Santa Claus. And I don't believe in Santa Claus anymore. And I hope kids are not listening to this podcast.
Nah, we got a higher demographic.
Okay. I don't want to frustrate anyone's illusions. He may exist, by the way, though. I'm not certain. I'm not certain. And the other thing is that, but the most and more than 50% or 60% of people just don't like you. You don't have a lot to do. It's really hard to change someone's mind. So, but the fascinating fact is that 9% of the people that were interviewed said that they knew me or had heard about me. And that is only possible in a small country.
Yep.
And that's been fascinating. This wasn't planned because I was the president of the party, and my role was to keep the fair play and make it fair for everyone to participate. But 2 months ago, we decided that it made sense. I had to run. I had to step down as a president and run as a candidate because it would help to bring traction to the project, which I think, clearly it has.
Awesome. And so I know you got a run here coming up soon, but so I got 2 last questions. Actually 3 quick ones. So what's the schedule for your presidential run? What are to get into? There's the primaries coming up.
Yeah, so we need to in Chile we're required. If you want to start a party, you need 33,000 signatures in front of a notary public. I know many of you may be laughing, but yes, that's true. In Peru, it's 600,000 actually.
Wow.
Yeah, so these are barriers of entry from the incumbents. Same thing.
And for our U.S. listeners, it's not a notary that's going to come to your house like any lawyer. You actually have to go to a place, wait in line, and sign.
Yeah, there are very few notaries. That's another non-competitive industry, which we'll fix very soon. So if we get the amount today, we have 15,000. We still have 20,000 to go. I'm confident that we'll get them. If that happens, there will be an online primary. Today there are 2 presidential candidates. It's myself and another Chilean called Nicolas Shea, who's a former stand-up comedian. I don't know. There's a 50-50 chance. Maybe he has a higher chance of winning the primary. And whoever wins that primary will be in the first round in November. Yeah.
Awesome. And then going back to, so all of your different businesses and Start-Up Chile and now the political party have bigger visions than I would say most entrepreneurs in Latin American countries have. Most of them will focus on a small piece in their local market and not think about going abroad. With Eclass, you're in 5-6 countries.
Yeah,
Cumplo,
3 mainly, but yeah.
Cumplo's still just in Chile, but expanding?
Cumplo's still just in Chile, but it will expand quite soon.
And Startup Chile is a global movement that's now spawned lots and lots of people that are copying it and doing things. What made you decide to go abroad, and what are tips for Latin American entrepreneurs that maybe aren't looking abroad? And we'll end on that.
Well, to be honest, I haven't succeeded. I haven't built a global operation yet. So Startup Chile is a local project that was replicated around the world. Eclass, it's not a global company. Maybe I've failed in some way. I think it should be more global than it is. Maybe it's because I left, whatever. But and Cumplo has a huge global potential, but it's we're only operating in Chile. And Todos, may well be the same thing. So far I haven't succeeded at that, but I think that going global has obvious reasons for it, and there's a trade-off on living in a small country far away, which is Chile, but as a good friend, when I was thinking whether should I come back or stay in the U.S., I met with a friend, a very successful Chilean entrepreneur that went to the U.S. when he was 40 and never came back. And he said, Nicolas, yes, the chances of building a greater company in the U.S. is obviously bigger than Chile, but the chances of generating higher impact in Chile, the chances in Chile are higher than here. If someone like you stays here, you will be, just another one. But if you go back to Chile and you really stir up things, you have a chance of changing a country, influencing the change of a country, and maybe from there, influencing the change of other countries. And actually, he said, to be honest, now that I'm 80, 79 years old, if I could choose, I would have gone back.
Really?
And that was a very significant, moment and advice. And I give him a lot of credit, and I thank him for that. So for some reason, financially, I don't want to be cynical because, of course, I like for profit and higher margins than lower. But I think I'm more driven by the impact than by the profit. I really see the profit as a mean to generating a lot of impact. So I may not be the guy to just take the things globally. I'm just a local player. And I play very well in my town. I'm sure it's certain that I will never play as well as I play here as in any other town because I just I'm from here. This is my place. This is my place. And secondly, just the possibility of influencing the public policy and e-learning and the financial and banking sector and now politics. That's huge, and it's fascinating. I mean, I've had anyone who's listening, run for office once in your life. If you win or not, doesn't matter. The experience. I spent, for the past month and a half, all I do, I'm speaking to Chileans. I was fishing in a boat last week, and I was
I saw the video.
In the market 2 weeks ago, and I'm going to a mine next week, and today I'm meeting with a guy in a kiosk downtown. And, yesterday I was with the kids, kids that were marching, students that were marching. If you ask them what's a problem, they will know. But then if you ask them what's a solution, they will know too. And most likely that solution is much better than what the bureaucrat has in mind, in some office space. And again, connecting the citizen to the representative, it's huge. That simple thing can have such a great. This thing hasn't even started. I was already invited to Helsinki in December to present at Slush, which is a big conference in tech innovation. And Harvard Business School, wants to call me up because they want to write the case around Todos. And Todos hasn't yet existed. I'm the pre-presidential candidate of a pre-party that may not exist in the next month or two, but will certainly exist in the next, whatever. It's a matter of time. And we'll be there,
Well, do you have anything else you want to add? Or think...
I don't know. I guess it's very cheesy and cliche, but, just, listen to yourself. And not always, but some, follow what you really want to do. Be rational. Don't take more risks than you should. But, just do it.
Well, I think this is a good spot to end it. I know you got to run. I'm sure we could talk for hours about all this stuff. Thanks again for taking the time to talk. I'm sure
thank
we
you.
can do a
Thank you
round
very
2
much.
later as your candidacy goes on.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Okay, Nate. Take care.
Thanks for being here.